Imagine going to school every day feeling like you are in a trap. People push you, hit you, and call you a loser just because you play a game meant for kids. You go home to the people who are supposed to love you, but when you tell your parents, they just laugh in your face. They told him it was just a joke. They told him to be a man. But for the Roblox boy, the pain was very real. When the bullying turned into a nightmare he couldn't escape, he decided to stop being the victim. He didn't want to be a hero. He just wanted it to end. This is the dark story of what happens when a quiet kid is pushed too far. After I've already told several bizarre stories involving Roblox, today we're going to learn about the case of a boy named Louise. Louise was an ordinary boy, and what he liked to do most was play Roblox. And because of that, he ended up suffering a lot of bullying at school. Several students in the classroom would get together to mock his face. They said that Roblox is a little kid's game, while laughing at his face and pushing him, which consequently, in the end, turned into a tragedy. But of course, adjust your spine there in the chair, on the couch, because you're going to need it. Grab that wonderful little coffee, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell. So come with me for one more video of a bizarre case involving Roblox. And the person who ends up telling us this story is a girl named Alina, who was Louise's best friend, actually his only one. The relationship between the two was very healthy. The two got along great, always talking when one needed the other. However, as much as Alina was his only friend, Louise himself preferred to be alone most of the time. He was an introverted boy. He hardly talked to anyone in the classroom for fear of them laughing at his face. Alina has already witnessed Louise suffering bullying from the people in class several times. The financial conditions of Louise's parents weren't the best, so normally he ended up going to school with simpler sneakers, with simpler clothes too. And a detail. His favorite thing to do was play Roblox almost always, as soon as he got home from school. But because of being a simpler person, he didn't have money to be able to buy Robux. Alina, his friend, felt a certain pity for Louise because of this, and because on many occasions when he stepped foot in the school, a crowd would gather to mock his face, saying he was a big baby because he plays Roblox. They said that he was poor and that he didn't even have Robux in his account. And Alina would end up observing everything from afar with pity for Louise. While the people said all those atrocities to Louise's face, they pushed him, slapped his head, practically belittling the boy as much as possible. However, one thing that Alina and Louise had in common is that they both played Roblox. They were the only ones in the entire school who played, actually. So, practically every break, Alina and Louise would meet in a part of the school to be able to play Roblox together on their cell phones. But since not everything is roses, most of the time the people would come to bother Louise, asking things like, "Roblox again, man? How old are you? You are a poor person. Are you going to cry now?" Even with all those jokes and bad taste, Louise still tried to fit in and go along with the people who mocked his face. But every day that passed, it was becoming even more unbearable. One certain day, they pushed him. On another, they slapped the back of his neck. However, one certain day, Louise was going to his classroom with headphones, and a boy arrived and took his headphones and broke them in front of him out of pure malice, and still looked at Louise's face and said, "So, Roblox boy, aren't you going to do anything?" Alina from afar saw the situation and decided to talk to the school principal. However, the principal simply didn't give it any importance. She said it was boys' play and nothing more than that. And it seemed like the boys never got tired of practicing bullying with Louise. And this was probably because Louise always stayed quiet, in silence, accepting everything, and as I said, normally laughing along to at least try to fit in. This practically only motivated the other boys to practice even more bullying with Louise, and it was getting heavier and heavier. One certain day, Alina and Louise were playing Roblox together, each one at their house. The two were on a call, everything normal, but Alina ended up noticing something. She noticed that Louise never changed his avatar. His avatar was always the same, and that was when Alina asked, "Why are you always with the same avatar and with this white mask?" Louise then responds, "If I have no expression, then you can't know what I am thinking." Alina tells us that what he had said was a very profound phrase. Having said that, they continued playing normally, But things at school only ended up getting worse. The next day, when Louise arrived at school, the situation had changed. It wasn't pushes or slaps anymore, it was hard punches to the stomach. And this was already crossing the limits and getting heavier and heavier. On another day, a boy ended up throwing him to the ground, even though before that, Louise was sitting there quietly, playing his Roblox without doing anything to anyone. However, this certain boy had no mercy at all for Louise. He started to humiliate him in front of everyone. He said the following: "Look at him. He looks like an NPC. He looks like an idiot, a robot." And in the face of all this, the crowd that was around started laughing at Louise's face, nicknaming him the Roblox Boy, shouting that he was poor and other things. And after all this confusion, Louise just took off running. He just wanted to get out of that situation as quickly as possible. Alina tells us that from that moment on, something ended up changing in Louise. From one second to the next, he stopped crying. He stopped complaining, took a very deep breath, and just ended up reflecting on what the people did to him, what they said to him, etc. And Alina tried to help in a certain way, but she was also afraid that they would do the same thing to her that they do to Louise. At the end of the day, everyone went home. Louise and Alina started talking a bit on Roblox, and she said, "Why don't you tell your parents? Why don't we record what they are doing? Why don't you defend yourself?" And Louise ended up answering something that left Alina speechless. "If I do that, they will be right about me. It is exactly what they say I am." Alina then said, "And they say you are what?" Louise says, "I am someone weak." But at the same time that Louise said that, he ended up saying the following to Alina: "But okay, I'm going to try to follow one of your ideas." Louise then ended up turning off his computer, and after a long time, that night, he decided to try. During dinner with his parents, with a low voice and a depressed expression, he told them, talked about the bullying he suffered at school, about the pushes and the jokes, that he was called a poor NPC, Roblox Boy, and other things. However, his parents, instead of saying something to make Louise feel better, saying they would talk to the principal or something else, they ended up looking at Louise's face and gave a light laugh. Louise at the time ended up regretting having told them, and his parents said, "Oh son, that's school play. Everyone goes through that. It's normal. You need to be stronger and not care about those things. It's just child's play." Louise then stayed completely in silence and totally destroyed inside. It was as if he had told that to a wall, and all he wanted was just to escape that situation and for his life to be normal. And in the early hours of that morning, Louise was having difficulty sleeping. He didn't feel a drop of sleep. He was in a state of panic and didn't want to go to school the next day, fearing that everything would repeat itself again. After some long minutes staring at the ceiling, Louise had an idea, and that was when he decided to sneak into his parents' room. With the light off and using only the cell phone flashlight, he started to search through some drawers. He searched and searched for something until he decided to search the wardrobe, and that's when he ends up finding pepper spray in one of the drawers. Louise then leaves his parents' room without making a single noise. Louise quickly, upon entering his room, puts the pepper spray in his backpack, and that's when he had this plan. And after having done that, he finally managed to sleep in peace. The next day, Louise arrives at school as if it were an ordinary day. He greets Alina, and the two of them end up entering the classroom. Alina sits in her place normally, and as soon as Louise goes to his desk, a boy ends up pulling his backpack and throwing him to the floor with great force. Louise then, without showing any reaction, just gets up. And that's when other boys gather to ask him, "So, did you manage to buy your Robux, or are you going to continue being this pathetic guy?" And this is where it all starts. After pushes, slaps, and punches, Louise didn't resist and ended up falling to the ground again. And while all this happened, the background laughter echoed. Alina, seeing this whole scene, she couldn't take it, tried to grab one of the boys and screamed desperately, and everyone pretended not to hear. And that's when Louise, lying on the floor, trembling with rage, ends up pulling pepper spray from his pocket. However, at the time, he only ended up threatening, pointing the pepper spray at one of the boys and shouted, "Enough!" And everyone around ended up laughing. And that's when Louise decides to press the spray. One of the boys ended up screaming in pain with his eyes extremely irritated and red. And while the boy screamed in pain, Louise ended up landing a punch to his stomach. Meanwhile, other boys went after Louise, and that's when he decides to fire the pepper spray again, and instantly the boys ended up falling to the ground because of the burning and irritation that the spray ends up causing. The two on the ground screaming in pain and with their hands on their faces. And obviously, after this whole commotion, the teachers who were in the hallway ended up hearing the screams, and that's when Louise and the boys were taken to the principal's office. Louise ended up being away from school for a while, and after Louise and Alina explained the situation, the boys who bullied Louise were expelled from the school. Anyway, 3 weeks passed after Louise had been away from school for a while, and as soon as he returned 3 weeks later, no one messed with him anymore. Everyone looked at him in a scared way, but something inside him had changed. He still played Roblox almost every day, still talked to Alina normally, and despite his conditions not being very good, he still dreamed of having Robux. But now he understood that that was never the real problem. The problem was never him liking Roblox. The problem was never him, but the problem was him never having done this before. He didn't become a school hero nor a villain, but he also wasn't someone who suffered alone anymore. And with Alina, his only friend by his side, for the first time, he ended up feeling that maybe things could be different from then on. And well, this was the story of Alina and Louise, the boy who suffered bullying day after day and whose routine of humiliation ended up becoming a snowball to eventually explode in the end. Well, I've already told you here, there's no problem at all in mocking someone once in a while, as long as it's just once in a while, and obviously without physical aggression. Now, staying every day giving nicknames to the person, humiliating them, hitting them, obviously it's not something very cool like that. And there's no problem at all in playing with your friends and with those you really know to mock, one laughing at the other's face, and in the end, you don't stop being friends. But anyway, this right here was the story of the boy Louise, who actually ended up becoming quite famous abroad, and I decided to bring it here for you too. Because, of course, you like story videos a lot, and if you want more videos like this, please leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell. Comment below as well what you thought of this story involving this boy named Louise. Did you think he acted right? Comment there, and I'll be giving a little heart to everyone's comments.